Hey, welcome back to the channel. As you can see today, we're going to be talking about blades, blade geometry, different variations in blades, and we've got a whole bunch of different knives we're going to be looking at. As you can see, it's going to be a really cool video, and I hope that you'll join me for this discussion on blade geometry. Hey, what kind of blade is that? Did you squirt Batman?
Yeah.
Hey, welcome back to the Fortified Castle. Got a really cool video for you. Hi to all my viewers. Bonjour, privet, guten tag, hola, and ciao to my foreign viewers. And today we're going to be talking about knife geometry. And basically what we're talking about that is the profile, shape, design of the blade. We're not going to get into a lot of the exotic types, but we are going to cover the basic types so y'all can have a foundation of knowledge of what those types are. Historically, there's only about 10 different kinds of blade shapes. We're going to go through those today. Again, I'm not going to get into a lot of the exotic blades, but basically blades start out as a three-dimensional piece of work. And so this is a block of African blackwood, and really cool. I'm going to make some scales out of this. But what you have here is three dimensions. You have length, you have width, and you have height, which is also considered depth. And so a lot of times, the metal was forged into ingots like this, flat piece of metal in which the blades were formed from. And so it's basically just science. And when we look at a blade like this, pardon me, you have the length, you have the width, and the depth is the spine right here, the width of the spine on the knife. So it's basically science, guys. Geometry, math. Okay, before we get into these knife designs, I want to go over some basic geometry with you on the blades. And so this is the spine of the knife, the top of the knife. This is the edge of your knife. But there's a lot more to a knife blade than you might think. So not only do you have the length, the width, and the depth of the knife to worry about, you have to form an edge. And the way that is done is by removing material. We call it a grind. And it removes material to create an edge. Now, there's a number of different grinds that you can put on a knife to create an edge. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is how do you form the point of the knife? And so there's a bunch of different ways to form the point of the knife. On some knives, the point is at the bottom towards the edge, and some knives it's in the middle, and some it's on the top. So if you look at this knife, the point is at the top. And let me see. On this one, the point is at the edge. And so that's a type of geometry that's involved in making your blade. Creating your grind, forming an edge, and creating a point on the knife. But that's not all. The hardest part is if you look at this blade, the stock is almost as thick as the spine on this knife, but it starts narrowing down, and you can see it narrow down to the point. And this is called a distal taper. And this is really the trick in making a knife, because you have to take, as you're creating this grind down to the edge, you also have to take metal off towards the front of the blade so that it tapers down to a point. And that's really the hard part in making a blade. and something that we don't often think about. Okay, guys, so probably the oldest type of blade geometry is this right here. This is an arrowhead, and you see a spear point on it. We call it a spear point because bigger examples of a blade like this would go on a spear, and I'm showing you a picture of one now. And these are the oldest examples of knives. Seem to have this triangular pattern right here, and that's how we get this right here, a spear point blade, or this blade right here, spear point. We're really old designs. And then as you get closer towards the Bronze Age, you actually start seeing stone artifacts that look more like this, where the edge is straight, and then you have a belly on the knife where the edge is right there. So it's about 3,500 years ago that you start seeing knives look more like this right here. So here you see some knives that are would be dated from around the 1200 period to the I don't know, 1500 period right here. These are French knives, and as you can see, the blade designs on these knives, you have a drop point edge right here, and you have spear point edges right here. And that's kind of, the basic knife design 500 years ago. So as you enter the 1800s, these three knife designs become your basic designs. And so you have a straight point edge on here. And so the geometry of the knife comes straight across to form a point, and then the edge sweeps up towards the blade of the knife. This was on a lot of belt knives, and it was a skinning type of pattern. You also had a drop point edge, and so you see on the spine of the knife how it rotates down towards a point, and then the edge comes up towards a point. And sometimes there's a lot of variation on these drop points. Some of them can be more severe, and some of them actually look like spear points. They drop so much, and the bottom comes up so much on the knife. But basically, a drop point is just a slow pitch to the point of the blade. And then early in the 1800s, you get the clip point. I don't see a lot of evidence that this clip point was used earlier. It may have. I mean, I'm not a knife expert, but I just don't see it in manuscripts or anything like that. This seems to be more of a late 1700s, early 1800s design that creates a sharp point quickly, maintains the thickness of your stock throughout the knife, which means it's strong. It's a fairly strong point, a clip point, and that's the beauty of the clip point knife. And then this is a butcher knife, very popular from about the 1600s even up to today. And here you have, it could either be straight across here, sometimes it's concave a little coming in, called a reverse curve, and then it clips. You have a little clip right here, and you have a long straight portion here, and then some belly to do some carving with, or skinning with right here. Very popular around the world type of design, and one of the basic knife designs that you see. Okay, before we move on, we're just going to review. These are your basic knife designs, I think, here. The straight point, which is a straight spine, the drop point, which it slowly comes down, and the clip point blade. Those are your most predominant in the knife community now. So we're going to move on here. Let me set these off in case I need them for example. Another type of knife design is this right here. It's called a Mediterranean because the earliest examples we can find of it is from the Mediterranean thousands of years ago. But as you can see, it's a triangular design, and it closely resembles the triangular design of your old stone edge weapons. And it features the widest point of the blade right here, and then the blade tends to slope down like a drop point, down to a point which falls in the middle of the blade, and then the edge also comes up to that point. And so in some ways it's like a spear point. It ends up being a spear point. But in a smaller knife, we often call this a leaf edge. So like your Spydercos have leaf style blades to them. This old triangular Mediterranean style blade. And this is another knife design that you find a lot in trade knives in the early 1800s. 1700s in America, but it's still popular today. A lot of times today, you mostly see this in cutlery, kitchen cutlery, but you can still find it in regular user knives also. Here's another blade design. This is called a tanto, and this is an American tanto, and so on a tanto blade, it's a thick, strong blade, and these blades were meant for stabbing. So you can see the very strong point on this blade. And what happens is the thickness of the spine is maintained throughout the knife, and then fairly rapidly the edge comes up to a point. And so you keep a really thick point. You can see that's pretty thick there. And if you look at this this spear point edge right here, you can see how thin that point is. Not very strong at all. But this is a very strong design. Originally, this is obviously an Oriental design, and in Japan, these were rounded, and so it was a rounded edge that came up. That's why I called it an American tanto. The Americans put the angle on it. And here you have another grind, which makes it a pretty complex knife. You have the narrowing to get to the edge right here. And so that's a whole nother grind on the knife blade. Pretty complex grind on the knife. You have your geometry leading to the edge, and then you have a separate geometry here. And then like on this one, this actually is kind of like a steer point in that it's thick here and comes down to the spine. I don't know whether you can, maybe you can pull that out. You see the angle on that? And so that's a tanto blade right there. This is I'm pretty sure this blade design comes from India. It's a kukri, and we associate it to India. And I really don't think this is a Middle Eastern design. Some Middle Eastern knives kind of have a shape like this, but it's kind of either at a 30 to 45 degree angle that the blade drops down. And again, you have a very strong point on it. You have a recurve here on the blade. That's called a recurve when it's not straight. It kind of curves in. And that tends, when you are cutting something, it drags whatever you're cutting into the blade. Nowadays, a lot of guys love to use these for chopping because they're heavy on the front. They're ideal for chopping. But actually, I read the Indian Manual of Arms, and these were used for in-close slicing, is the way they use these. But I'm sure they certainly whacked off a few arms with these too. Oh, what else do we got? Okay, let's go into the spear points. So spear point usually is sharpened on both sides. On this knife, you have a regular spine, but you do have it sloping down into a spear point. You can see that design there. And I'll show you my demonstrator. And that's why they call it a spear point. Really popular design on knives. And one of my favorites. Here's another example here that shows you better. On a cross section of this, again, you can see on the at the middle there is a high point, and then the grind goes down at an angle this way, and it goes down at an angle this way, creating an X cross pattern. Usually, again, spear points are sharpened on both sides. On this M3, you can see that it is sharpened on this side right here, but not all the way. So you have some thickness here. And this was the American take on the spear point created by the British. And I'll show you that next. But again, you can see the X cross section. Let me see. So you can see it's angled towards the spine, and it's angled towards the edge. You see that? And that's what creates a spear point. When this is really acute down here, this point, so when that's a really sharp transition there on the spear point, it's called a needle point. And that's definitely a needle point blade right there. Very, very fine tip on that, used for piercing. Okay, another type of point on a knife is called a Nmic. So this blade far predates the Nmic blade. So I'd say that Nmic probably copied this blade design. But this is something you see in the early 1800s also. This is a carver. You have a recurve right here, but whether it curves or not, the blade will sweep up to a high point and then cut down kind of like a sheep's foot. But on a sheep's foot, the blade is straight all the way across. We're going to go over that in a minute. So you have a unique design here that is really good for skinning, and that's what a Nmic knife was basically designed for, a bushcraft skinning knife. And this point right here, it's rounded. It doesn't come to the point until lower. It's not really on the edge. And what that allows you to do is get underneath the skin of an animal without damaging organs. You can see it just slides along right there, and you slide along cutting the skin like that with the blade up. And that's what this Nmic design was for. I'm sorry I don't have a better knife to show you, but I just don't have a Nmic knife. But this is the same design as a Nmic. Oh, what else? Okay, let's get into the sheep's foot. So this is a sheep's foot blade. It's characterized by a long edge, long straight edge on the bottom of the knife. And then at the top, it is also straight. And then you have a curve here. It's a nicely formed curve that comes sharply down and creates your point at the bottom. And so a sheep's foot is really good for detailed work. It's also a very strong blade that you can use for cutting into something. A good work blade for a bunch of different tasks. English sheep's foots are usually kind of, if you look at where that actually begins right there, you can see that nice curve going on there. Nice semicircle across the axis here of the width of the knife. Here's another example right here. This is an English-made knife. Again, you can see if you take that axis across here, see how it goes much further than the American sheep's foot. So Americans tended to draw this out further this way, the curve, and you can see the difference between these two right there. It's much more abrupt, and it's not that you can't find English ones that draw this curve out more, but that's more typical of the English sheep's foot. Americans kind of changed it, modified it a little. Here's another example, and you can see that the curve is much, much longer, further back. You see how much further back it goes? And these are made in China. You see that a lot with Chinese sheep's foot. They tend to stretch that curve back towards you a lot. So the next blade is a lamb's foot. This is a lamb's foot blade right here. And you're like, well, wait a minute, it looks like a sheep's foot. And yeah, it does. But if you put these two up together, you see a difference. If it's by itself, it's hard to tell the difference. But when you put it up to a sheep's foot, the angle is much more acute, and there's less. It's only rounded right here to create the blade. Another thing about a lamb's foot is normally on a sheep's foot, the width back here is about the width right here. It's a little wider on this one, but if you look at this knife right here, the width right here is exactly what it is right there before it curves down. On a lamb's foot, the blade plunges towards the curve up here. And so let me see if you look right here, you got about 11/16, and when you get up here, it's only about it's less. It's hard to tell on that one. Here's another English knife. It's more apparent on this knife, but you have back here a little over 3/8. You can see where the cutoff is right there. When you come up here, it's right at 3/8. And so the blade is getting smaller as it comes this way. That's your classic lamb's foot on an English blade. You see it here. This is worn some, but it's the same thing. You could tell it's wider here, and then it narrows down towards the point before it plunges down. And that's a big difference between a lamb's foot. I think you could see it here too. The blade just goes down a little. It only goes down about a 1/16 on this knife, but that's the difference in a lamb's foot. Is the spine of the knife is not square across here like it is on a sheep's foot. It comes down a little bit. The edge of the blade is straight like a sheep's foot, and then the angle here is much more acute, and you only have a little tiny curve up here rather than the whole blade being curved. And so that's a good example right there to show you the difference between the two of those. Another blade style is the Warrencliff. So on a Warrencliff, you have a straight edge just like a lamb's foot or sheep's foot, but the blade continuously curves down. Sometimes it may extend like an inch, maybe up to here or here before it starts curving. And then it curves all the way down. And again, this provides a very strong blade. It's good for skinning because it points the blade up. And then also you have a fine point for detail work, like working with leather or other things. Another one that gets confused, a lot of times this gets confused with a sheep's foot. This is a coping blade. It's not a very good example on this. I think this knife is a Japanese blade. But if you look at this case, it's much more apparent. It's a very sharp angle that comes out and then boom down, usually around a 30 to 45 degree angle. And it doesn't curve. It doesn't curve at all like a sheep's foot blade. And again, it provides a very strong point for detail work. That's your coping blade. Here's another blade. It's a razor blade. You can tell it looks like the old time razors. And again, On razor blades, usually you have a convex grind on it, and so you can call that a hollow grind. And so both sides, you can see it on here as you look. You see how that you can see the grind on that blade where it just cuts in, and the point is to present a very, very fine edge on the knife, and then a very precise point on it. Another one is the hawk bill. On the hawk bill, you have a straight edge. It plunges down, much like a sheep's foot, but it's kind of a reverse trailing edge. So a trailing edge knife trails up like this to get to the point. Like this is a trailing edge knife. The edge trails up to come to a point, but it's reverse. And so instead of trailing up, it trails down, providing a very sharp point here. These traditionally were used for pruning. Works great pruning plants. But nowadays, you know, we find all kinds of uses for this blade style right here. And I'll show you the trailing point one more time. So a trailing point blade, you have almost a continuous curve on your edge that comes all the way up. Sometimes these drop down. Sometimes there's a recurve here. This has a very slight recurve on it. And a lot of times on small knives, these are called Turkish. A lot of clip blades have this design right here where they plunge down and then come back up. And they call that a Turkish clip. But a Turkish clip is a style of a trailing edge knife. What else? Okay, that's pretty much the standard blade styles. So I'm going to close this out really quick by showing you some different stuff. I really don't buy a lot of exotic knives, but this is a really popular blade. I remember when this came out, guys just loved it from Kershaw. And it has a lot of different designs in it here. So you have a leaf style design here, kind of like a triangulation, but on the leaf style, you have a belly where it's actually swooping down and out before it curves back to create a belly. Then you have a recurve on the top here. It's fairly thick stock along the spine. And then when you come to your point, it's kind of like a sheep's foot. It starts sloping down like a sheep's foot. And so it's a composite design of a bunch of different blade styles that's really good for slicing, for cutting, and for detail work. And guys just love this on in the trades, that type of knife. Here's another one, kind of composite, kind of a leaf style blade where it sweeps up, almost like a trailing point blade, but you can see the spine sweeps down to it rather than the tip coming up to the spine. And just a different kind of design on this. And so I just showed you the basic designs that we started out with. And then, you know, knife designers have created all kinds of things. This is a straight edge, and then at an angle it sweeps up towards the point. Kind of unusual there. You have some man, I'm losing my train of thought. So you have some geometry that's cut out here, creating, you can also see the different grinds that's used. So this is a hollow grind here, and this is basically a hollow grind, but it forms different geometries in the blade. And that's kind of what's going on nowadays. You know, guys are just getting really creative on these blades. That has a really wicked point on this knife. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out the video now, and I hope you found it informative. Appreciate you guys for bearing with me. A lot of knives to cover here and go over, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I really thank you for watching the video.